recently agreed to write a magazine article about the power and passion of older women in the theater. Then she realized there weren't any. Welcome to Women in Theater. I'm Linda Weiner, theater critic of Newsday, and our guest today is Tina Howe, who for over 3 decades has been writing appalling and hilarious plays about what she calls the dailiness of women's life, but on a dizzying operatic scale.
I'm dazzled.
Are you dazzled? Are you dazzled already? Oh, okay. First off, I'm starting now, although most people know you from painting churches and coastal disturbances and Pride's Crossing, but I want you to tell me about Women in Flames.
Oh, mercy. Women in Flames, the play that no self-respecting producer will touch.
This is what I want to know.
Yeah.
Because this is the play that you wrote about in that article about the passion of older women. So.
I wrote Women in Flames on the heels of Pride's Crossing. Oh dear, where does one begin? It's many different things. On the one hand, it's a Valentine to the theater because it's all about an aging female playwright who was having her play produced in a little equity waiver house in Southern California with a very broken down cast. And she falls in love with the young leading man who was a sweet, sort of innocent boy. He's not a macho man, but he's just this sweet boy who's sort of had his hand caught in the cookie jar. And I think, like many playwrights, I have a great fondness for Cyrano, the play, you know, because so many of us, or at least I perceive myself as that deformed poet who has to stand in the shadows. When I write my plays, I hire these beautiful actors to stand in for myself, and they can voice my ardor in ways that I could never do in public. And I've always been struck by the beauty and the excitement of that moment of the poet suddenly being under the balcony, being able to woo his beloved unseen. And I thought, why haven't we ever seen a woman under the balcony? Why haven't we ever seen a woman who has a way with words melting the heart of a beautiful young man? And that was also very much part of the impulse, was to create a play in which we would see a woman doing that. And so then I started to think, well, what deforms Cyrano is his nose, and what deforms a woman is age. So I would choose a 50, you know, going on 60-year-old woman to stand under the metaphorical balcony and woo the object of her affection. And so I conceived the play to have her be the playwright and to him be the sort of charming young leading man. And actually what happened to me during the run of Coastal one evening...
This is Coastal Disturbances that you had a Tony nomination for and went to Broadway.
Yeah.
And with an unknown actress named Annette Bening.
Yes, that's right, who we pride ourselves on finding. I mean, maybe she found us. Who knows how that goes.
You made her. You aided her.
I got into this whole idea of this woman who suddenly ends up wooing the man, and during this run of Coastal, when we were still at second stage before we had understudies, I got a call at 5 o'clock in the evening from Carol Rothman, the director, saying Rosemary Murphy was going to be out. She was ill, and she said, "You have to go on, Tina." And I said, I have to go on, but I'm not an actress, and I don't know the lines, and the audience will storm the box office, and you're crazy. And she said, if you don't go on, the theater loses $2,000. And I said, well, what do? I don't know the lines. And she said, we give you the script, and it's a tradition. This often happens, and you sort of dress like Rosemary, and you get on the stage, and you carry the script with you. And so I found myself agreeing that I would do this, and I got some beachy clothes and went down to the theater and had my script and was in a state of absolute panic. And I knew enough not to try to act, since I'm not an actress. So what I tried to do was sort of imitate Rosemary in the most subtle, seamless way that I could. By the end of the show, well, actually at intermission, somebody told me that Sidney Lumet was in the house. By the end of the show, I found myself posing, striking poses to show off my profile because it had once been admired, and sort of milking my lines and showing bits of my ankle, thinking, I'm going to be discovered, I'm going to be in the movies. And it was outrageous, outrageous behavior. But I think something happens to you when you're suddenly under the lights. Anyway, so, you know, massive applause, because actually it was something of a freak act, I think, you know, to see tall Tina, you know, maneuvering around the stage, and I was given a big bouquet. But it made a great impression on me, and so the big moment in my play, Women in Flames, is when, like me, Isabel, the playwright, suddenly finds that she has to go on in the place of the leading lady, but unlike me, thank God, she has to do a love scene with the object of her affection. So she gets into the love scene and then gets so carried away she drops her script and starts improvising from her heart in the language of the play. So the audience thinks this is all part of the play, but poor Billy, her leading man, has no idea what she's doing because she has clearly gone off book. So he starts, you know, doing bits from other plays and trying to back up, and you know, eventually he realizes that she's talking to him, and he's so flattered that he pulls her into a very real embrace, and they become lovers. So, you know, what could be better?
Big strings, music with strings.
Right.
So you did a couple readings.
Yeah.
Paul Rudd and
Blythe Danner, we've done 3 readings, and Blythe Danner always played...
and I love how you described it, that all the people who were there, the producers who came to look at it, they acted as if Black Widow spiders had been released on their laps.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think part of it was the play is a bit overwritten. It's a bit overly exuberant, and there's a lot of dither.
Oh,
and,
no, not you.
Yeah. So I think that was part of it, but I think also the specter of Paul Rudd being crushed in Blythe's arms, and they got so into the love scene that they had to stop and fan themselves with their script. So something was going on.
What's going on with women playwrights? How come they're not getting produced?
Oh, mercy.
I'm sorry, was that a bad transition?
No, cut to the chase.
I mean, yeah, when you said something was going on, something else is going on, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think it's always been going on. And it's something, God knows, that I think about often. I think part of the problem is that most of our artistic directors are men, and they have, you know, they're familiar with certain types of stories. And what I've come to realize is that women playwrights are safe, and this is a sort of shocking thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway, but I think women playwrights are safe if they portray women as victims. Mm-hmm. So if you see a woman with an incurable disease, or who's been manhandled and abused in some way, and who suffers and totters around the stage, I think those plays tend to be more accepted than the plays which feature a strong woman, a sexy woman, a smart woman, a woman in love, a woman who was dazed by love, and that whenever we try to sort of feature a character like that, we're accused of being sentimental. And I speak from experience. I mean, this is what was leveled at me with Pride's Crossing, which I didn't think of as a particularly sentimental play, because I have this feisty 90-year-old woman in the middle of it who is, you know, has her moments of wanton anger, and you know, granted, there's a great love scene at the end, but I remember the critic accusing me of sentimentality, saying that it was sort of like picking up a ladies' magazine.
Now, Pride's Crossing, 1997.
Yes.
With the unbelievably radiant Cherry Jones.
Yes.
I got to get into a word for her, but I can't help it. As the first woman to swim the English Channel,
yes,
and it goes through her whole life.
Yes.
And at the very end, she does this thing that I have never seen on the stage. She stands there and she actually dives off into
the arms of her fellow actors.
How horrifying was that?
Yeah, no, it was Cherry's idea. My script simply said that she walks into the English Channel, and Cherry said, "I want to jump." So then the question was, what does she jump from? And we already had some beds on the stage which were hidden, and so Jack O'Brien, the director, decided to cover them with astroturf and make them look like a promontory, so that, you know, Cherry had this whole love scene on this little cliff with her English lover who had swum the channel before her. And at the end of their scene, you know, when she's getting ready to enter the channel, and normally one would not jump off a cliff into the English Channel, one would wade in, but Cherry said, I want to jump. And then the question was, well, who would catch her and how would we do this? And It's an old acting exercise, you
It
know.
was such trust.
Yeah, the trust thing.
Such trust. Something I love that you said around that time was, there is no rage like an old lady's
Yes,
rage.
yeah.
You know, who's going to write about the smart old ladies?
Well, actually, my next play, I seem to be on some collision course with my own mortality. My next play is set in a nursing home, and most of the characters are in their 90s. So something weird is going on with me because, you know, as we get older, you know, for so many of us, our parents or our aunts and uncles are now being, you know, living in nursing homes, and it's a reality that is terrifying and fraught with potential drama. And I just figured it's time that somebody really took that, you know, took that environment and found a way to make it theatrical and find a way to make it bearable.
What's the name of that play?
At the moment, it's called Luncheon on the Grass, and
Elizabeth France.
and the way it came into being, if you're interested, is my Aunt Mattie was put into the Baptist Home for the Aged in
The
Riverdale.
inspiration also.
The information, yeah,
for Pride's Crossing.
For Pride's Crossing, and we put her in this nursing home in Riverdale because my brother lived right next door, and this was a way that he could keep an eye on her. And she was there for 4 years, pretty much sort of balled up in the fetal position, and you know, she'd given up with her, you know, her face to the wall, and she was just not interested in life whatsoever. In the course of the 4 years she was there, the home was acquired by the Hebrew Home for the Aged, and I thought, if this isn't a play, imagine my waspy Aunt Mattie, who's sort of angry and withdrawn, and if she suddenly gets this buoyant Jewish roommate with a huge family that are, you know, always telling stories and eating and having a great time and full of love and able to express themselves, what would happen? So it's about this very unlikely friendship that occurs, and also when my father was very ill, when he was in the hospital, he kept trying to escape, and so I want these two ladies to plan an escape, and I want them to pull it off. So it is sort of a buddy picture about a great escape.
Now, your father, Quincy Howe.
Yes.
First of all, you've had this sort of amazing, privileged, blue blood,
Yeah.
eccentric life.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your family.
My father, Quincy Howe, was an eminent news commentator on CBS.
And is it true, before you go on, that he used to read the news on the radio and you and your mother would sit and listen every night?
Yeah.
And then your mother would go, poor daddy.
And my mother would sigh, poor daddy. I think what
Would
she...
she mean that because the news was bad?
No. I think she was really saying poor me, because she grew up, you know, in a sort of Boston Brahmin environment. And she used to say, I don't know any gentlemen who are in radio. And I think there was a part of her, in spite of his eminence, that wished that he were a lawyer or a banker pulling down lots and lots of money. And so I think the poor daddy was really her way of saying, poor me, that here's my husband just reciting the evening news over the airwaves, and why isn't he, you know, buying me a beautiful house in the Hamptons, and why aren't we flying to Paris and, you know, having the good life. I mean, it took me a long time to figure that out. But my mother, like me, was 5'10" and a bit. And if that wasn't enough, she wore her hair in an upsweep, and then she wore a hat on top of the upsweep, so that she was really more like 6 feet tall, and my father was about 5'6". So she towered over him, and she was a very eccentric individual. I mean, her passion was the arts, and she was an amateur watercolorist, and she collected driftwood on the beach, and she collected animal skeletons, and she would, you know, sort of show them off in our little apartment on 82nd Street, and she'd have the animal skeletons next to the driftwood, and then she'd have little seashells that had the Last Supper carved in them, and beaded bags from Niagara Falls that depicted the entire falls in multicolored beads. So it was a rather, you know, eccentric household.
Well, everyone who, you know, goes to the theater in New York feels that they know your family because of Painting Churches, the play about a daughter coming to terms with her aging parents, who happen to be a little bit like yours.
Yes, yes.
Did you, Well, your parents were alive still.
No,
Oh, they
no,
weren't.
no. There was no way I could have written it when they were alive. And people often ask, what would they have thought of it? They would have been appalled. They would have been appalled because, you know, I mean, here's the other thing people keep saying, is this autobiographical? And I've sort of found this very glib response. How did it go? It's all true, but none of it happened. And my father was not a poet. My father did not become sort of senile and gaga at the end.
But he did read Ulysses to you when you had hepatitis?
He did read Ulysses to me.
He did teach poetry to the parakeets?
He did teach poetry to the parakeets, and he loved language, and he'd take me to hear readings by E.E. Cummings, and you know, and I was always read aloud to as a child. So, you know, but I was very, I mean, at the time I wrote the play, actually both of them were in fairly good health, but I was very aware of the clock ticking and that how long was this going to go on. And I think they would have been appalled at the specter of an upstanding New England man losing it. I think they would have been deeply upset. And I suppose for me, what I learned from the play, and this is a reason that I encourage my students, I teach playwriting at Hunter College, you know, one of the great bonuses of being a playwright is that you get to rewrite your past and you get to alter your history. And, you know, I was always sort of the ignored child, and because I have a radiant brother who was ever so much the favorite and my favorite as well. And so in the play, I portray sort of in the first act the anger of the girl who is not seen, who is invisible. And in the second act, I deliberately switched the focus to the parents. And in the course of writing the scenes where the parents are saying, but, you know, you don't really see us. You know, you want to paint us, but you're not really looking at us. You don't really see what's going on here. And in the course of writing the scenes for you know, my stage mother, so to speak, I began to understand her loneliness, and I began to understand the pain that she had gone through in her life. And this sounds so pretentious, but I forgave her. And that was extraordinary, to finally forgive a mother who has been, you know, a rather difficult mother. And it was an enormous sort of release and moment of transcendence for me, that through writing the play, I came to understand her, and I came to pity her, and I tried to show that the daughter is something of a narcissist, of an egotist. So that was a huge journey for me to go through.
You've had another journey recently, translating two one-act plays, The Bald Soprano and The Lesson,
Yes.
by UNESCO.
Yes.
And a very big success. I saw it just the other night at the Atlantic Theater Company.
Yes.
And, you know, filled to the, you know, rafters.
Yes.
With all these people who wanted to hear this very strange, desperate communication. UNESCO is what, your spiritual grandpappy, you
Yes,
said, or
he
something
is. Yeah,
like
no,
that. Tell me.
Yeah, he's my guy. He's my spiritual leader. I'm his acolyte. I remember after I introduced him at the 92nd Street Y in 1986, there was a little party afterwards, and you know, a number of important people and a lot of French scholars were there. And at one point, Robert Wilson walked into the room, and Ionesco rose and said, "Ah, mon fils spirituel," you know, my spiritual son. And I sort of wanted to slap him in the face and say, but I'm your spiritual son because I use language.
Yeah, he doesn't do anything
and
with language.
Robert
That's crazy.
Wilson, I mean, he certainly is an avant-garde artist, and he creates beautiful stage images, but I'm the one that turns language on its head, and I am the one who is your spiritual son. But I didn't have the nerve to say it because I was well brought up, and I certainly wouldn't slap him in the face. But I first saw these plays when I was a young thing in Paris.
After Sarah Lawrence?
After Sarah Lawrence,
Okay.
my father said, I'll either send you to graduate school for a year or to Europe. What's your choice? I mean, really. So Jane Alexander and I hopped on this student ship, and we sailed to Paris together. She ended up ultimately in Edinburgh, where she was going to study mathematics, and I ended up at the Sorbonne, where I was going to study philosophy. And within 2 weeks, Jane was acting, and I was writing my first full-length play. And I'd never studied theater in college because I went to all of these experimental schools, and I never thought of myself as a playwright. And I didn't know anything about Ionesco, but a friend took me to see these plays. And you know, the dither and the joy and the rapture of the bald soprano with all of this miscommunication was so familiar to me, and it was so much like my own living room, that I had this blinding moment of total recognition. And where other people say, oh, but Ionesco is a master of the absurd, for me, he's a master of realism. And so it was just this extraordinary thunderbolt of recognition and familiarity and feeling, I know his art, I know his pain, I know his joy, and it was huge. And then, of course, the next day, the play I was working on became more and more Ionesco-like in its language and in its construct. And of course, I never showed it to anyone because it was a preposterous play. I mean, it was ludicrous, but the influence was profound. And then the next one that was produced closed in a night because
at the Nest?
Yeah, because of the excesses.
Was this Jill Clayburgh
This was
jumping
yes.
naked into a wedding cake?
Yeah, boy, you really do know your stuff. I'm very impressed. Yes, Jill Clayburgh jumped naked into a wedding cake that was filled with. It was covered with shaving cream and real live frosting because one of the actors had to lick all of the frosting off of her body as he crooned that she was like a chocolate bonbon, a raspberry nougat, in this very flowery language. And the audience was in raptures. But Clive Barnes said of the 10 worst plays he'd ever seen in his life, this went right at the top. So we closed, very quickly. But
that was in the Times at that time?
Yeah, and, I think it's one thing for an artist like Ionesco to play with issues of identity and power in the male world, but I think for a woman to do that, there's something decidedly off limits. It's sort of like, it's okay for a man to get drunk at a bar, but the specter of a drunken woman is something that makes people crazy. And and then the next play, Birth and Afterbirth, which was about how women compete over their fertility, was so wild that nobody would produce it. It took 23 years to have it done. So I realized quickly that I could love Ionesco all that I wanted, but there was, to try to emulate him was a big mistake.
You've said that your white glove plays do well, but your barehanded plays do not.
My barehanded plays
but
suffered.
Before, this time is going really fast, and you are one of the few really successful women who also has a 40-something-year-old marriage.
Yes,
and
44
two children
years.
And
yeah.
live on the Upper West Side. And, you have a real life.
I do have a real life.
Who said you could have a real life?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. No. I think the only way to have a life in the theater is to have a real life, is to have a family and somebody to love and somebody to look after you, because it's too random and too difficult.
Yeah. And your husband's a biographer?
No, he's actually
a novelist?
He's he teaches American Studies at NYU. He's an adjunct there, and he teaches courses in autobiography and distance, and he teaches courses in American values and American writers and the culture of war. He sort of fills the writers up with knowledge so that they're always pouring out to their teachers, and it's time that somebody put something inside of them. So he was trained as a historian.
Okay, here's my question. If your daughter, Dara, were to write about her family the way you've written about yours.
Oh, what an appalling thought.
In 2 minutes or less, what do you think she'd write?
Well, I think she'd write a farce that showed a very sweet, world-weary Jewish husband and a rabid wife who was always driving everybody crazy, and
High wasp
who's sort of flying around the room with her wings extended, and the sweetness of the husband who puts up with it, and the giddiness of the wife who's always trying to shock him and ruffle his feathers. And I think it would probably be a fairly loving portrait, but it would certainly be on the wild side.
Does she write?
No, she was an actress for a while, but that was too excruciating. So now she teaches nursery school. Our son is the artist. Our son is a hip-hop funk musician. So Eben,
Chucklehead?
Yeah, Chucklehead.
The group Chucklehead?
The group Chucklehead. Man, you are awesome. This is awesome.
Awesome. I'm awesome.
Yeah.
And I suppose he's not going to do a hip-hop version of
No.
his family,
I think,
so you're safe on that one.
I think I'm safe on
You
that
think
one,
you
and I'm
actually-
so proud of him.
You actually squeaked through then.
Yeah, I mean, when Chucklehead was at its height, you know, and they were playing all over the eastern seaboard, Eben would wear, you know, pants made out of astroturf, and he'd dye his hair purple. I couldn't have been more proud. I just thought, this is the way to have a son. And that, you know, as a rapper, he's a white rapper. His music and his lyrics were all, you know, language, and it was his way of being a poet, and God forbid, you know, if he had decided to be a playwright or a poet, that would have been the end of the line. But, you know, to have your son be a rapper, to me, is the height of ecstasy. You know, it shows that he is a fully evolved young man of his time.
You've called yourself a well-mannered anarchist. You've just summed it up, right?
Oh, good. Oh,
right,
good.
right. You have. Thank you, Tina Howe. Thanks so much
Oh,
for
thank
being here,
you.
and thank you for being here. On behalf of the League of Professional Theater Women, I'm Linda Weiner, and this has been Women in Theater.